Davis-Bacon Amendment. And what it does, it provides that none of the funds made available by this act may be used to implement, to administer, or enforce the prevailing rate of wage requirements, commonly referred to as the Davis-Bacon Act. And, Mr. Chairman, I think that we know what this bill does. It's 1931. It was established for, I'll say, trade protectionism, labor protectionism, to lock the African-American labor from Alabama out of the construction trades in New York City that were unionized at that time and strongly protected and still are, actually. But the substance of it is this. I have a letter here that was written by Grover Norquist, the president of Americans for Tax Reform, and in summary, it says this: because the Davis-Bacon Act reduces the number of jobs, increases costs, and has a racist history, funds from the FAA Reauthorization Act should not be used to fulfill Davis-Bacon Act requirements. Americans for Tax Reform, therefore, strongly supports Congressman King's amendment. And that's one version of description of this bill. Here's another that I thought was a little bit more descriptive. This is an article written by George Will, and it's dated June 19, 2017. He references back to River City, and he says, a quote from that, the Music Man, "You really ought to give Iowa a try, provided you are contrary." And he starts out this article this way, and it's the language, the quote is from Iowa Stubborn, the song in The Music Man, Mr. Chairman. It says, "Contrary does not quite capture Steve King's astringency. The Iowa native and conservative congressman was born appropriately in Storm Lake, Iowa, and carries turbulence with him. He also carries experience of actual life before policies, actual life before politics when he founded a construction company, which is one reason he has long advocated an excellent idea, repeal of the Davis-Bacon law. King came to Congress in 2003 and has been stubbornly submitting repeal legislation since 2005. He would not have succeeded even if he were less of a prickly cactus and more of a shrinking violet. Davis-Bacon is just another piece of government that is as indefensible as it is indestructible. And so today, when social hygienists are cleansing the public square of names and statues tainted by historical connections with racism, Davis-Bacon's durability is proof that a measure's racist pedigree will be forgiven if the measure serves a progressive agenda. It's time to put an end to Davis-Bacon. We can do that here today, Mr. Chairman. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon
rise in opposition, claim time in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, this is a perpetual debate here on the floor whenever it comes to the expenditure of federal tax dollars then on projects that are covered by Davis-Bacon, as would be projects under the Airport Improvement Program and other related activities by the FAA. Bottom line here is we can chase the lowest common denominator around the United States or around the world sometimes in terms of trade and undermine the capability of Americans to make a decent living, to have a home and have a family and live the American dream. The savings are illusory at best. In many cases, they would go to profits for non-union shops and others. We would return to the old days of, basically exploiting those who work in construction and related activities. With that, I would yield, how much time you want? 30 seconds. Okay, minute to the gentleman, Mr. Kildee.
The gentleman's recognized for a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank Mr. DeFazio both for yielding, but especially for his leadership on this issue. As the ranking member said, this is something that comes up every year. Thankfully, Democrats and Republicans have stood together to protect this important worker protection. And let's just be clear about this. This is about the desire to engage in this race to the bottom, to pay working families less money. And the truth of the matter is, coming from a community like Flint, Saginaw Bay City, where we've seen significant and continuing loss of earned income by working people, where we have a chance to say to the American people that when it's your tax dollars being spent, we're not going to use them to undermine the ability of a family to have a decent wage. People work hard at these jobs. They have trained long for these jobs, going through apprenticeships or other skilled training. And the idea that we would reverse a decades-long commitment to the American worker, that when it comes to federally funded projects, we're going to ensure that if you work hard, play by the rules, you get a decent wage. I support that, and we all should. Thank you, and I yield back.
I reserve the balance of my time. Yep.
Okay. Gentleman from Iowa is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, may I inquire as how much time is remaining on each side?
Gentleman has 2 minutes.
And on the other side, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from Oregon has 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield myself so much time as I may consume. And I hear these arguments constantly. Lowest common denominator, non-union shops. We know it's union scale. There's a confession that it is, even though the law says that it's prevailing wage. Exploiting workers, race to the bottom, people work hard. These are standard lines that come out every year. But I'm the one that's lived this. We've met payroll for over 42 years, and we pay a competitive wage, and we want to hire the best people we can and pay them the best wages that we can, and we want to have the lowest turnover possible, and we're in pretty good shape that way after 42 years. I think I know about this. Davis-Bacon increases inefficiencies, and it puts people in the wrong place doing the wrong thing for the wrong incentives. And by the way, who's hardworking? The taxpayers are hardworking. The taxpayers are paying the bill for an extra 20% on every construction project in America. In a lot of cases, we're borrowing the money from China and putting the debt onto our children. That's what we're faced with here, Mr. Chairman, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman for what?
Yield myself such time as I may consume. Look around the country. There are many states that have not adopted a minimum wage that exceeds the federal minimum wage of $7.50 an hour. That's pretty pathetic. My state is one of many that has chosen to far exceed that minimum wage. But if we do away with it, this says that federally funded contracts must receive the local prevailing wage for their work. In Oregon, we've recognized that with a higher minimum wage, so our prevailing wages are going to be higher than some state that pays, that only follows the federal minimum wage of $7.50 an hour. So might some contractor do? Oh, I can go over here and hire people who are used to earning $7.50 an hour. I'm going to import them into Oregon. Of course, you're going to still have a problem with our minimum wage law. This is what this is about, is to find less expensive labor and move it around the country. That, I believe, is a disservice to the working people of the United States. I would urge Congress, as it has done every other time this amendment has been offered, to reject it on a broad bipartisan basis. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Iowa has 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then in closing, and I appreciate the gentleman's remarks, but I would add for the body that the federal minimum wage really is not relevant at all to this Davis-Bacon wage scale debate. There's nobody working under Davis-Bacon wage scales that's making minimum wage. That's outside. And by the way, that federal minimum wage is becoming irrelevant as competition for wages is driving things up. But here's another way to think about this. I've long said that if it's a road construction, you can build 5 miles of road instead of 4 if you get rid of Davis-Bacon, 5 bridges instead of 4 if you get rid of Davis-Bacon. If it happens to be river construction, we lost a lock and dam on the Mississippi going into the weekend, lock and dam number 11. These things cost money. There are 29 of those. We could either fix 23 of them under Davis-Bacon or all 29 of them without Davis-Bacon. There are 45 major airports in America, and if we're going to renovate those airports, we can renovate all of them or we can renovate 36 of them, depending on whether this amendment passes or fails, Mr. Chairman. So I urge the adoption of my amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. Those in favor say aye.